Okay. Good morning, everybody. This is Chattin with CHAP, and I am your host, Ginger Wade. And I have a guest with me today, which I'm very excited about. I think you are going to love the conversation we're going to have. I just want to let you guys know that it is Civics Education Day. And let me tell you, this civics education is for everyone. This is for adults. This is for kids. This is for everyone who loves America and wants to know how to protect her, right? So gather around, listen up, share this with everybody that you know, because we all need to be thinking about these things that we're going to talk about today. You know, it's election season. I know you're getting the mailings. I know you're getting the ads on YouTube. I'm getting them constantly. I'm getting texted constantly. You know what's going on. But I just want to say, and presidential elections are really important, but everybody, it boils down to local politics. It's the whole way down. We all need to be involved. So please get out there and vote. I think it's too late now in Pennsylvania to register, but if you are registered, make plans for November 5th to get out and vote. So my guest today, go ahead,
Forgive
Winkie.
me. Yeah, no, forgive me. Sorry. Yeah.
So my guest is Winkie Ilic. And she is friends of Alicia. You guys, if you came to convention and you watched my show for a long time, you've seen Alicia Hunt on my show. She is friends with Alicia, and Alicia connected me with her, and she has quite the background and story to share with us. I'm so glad she's on with us today because she's going to help us understand kind of some of our processes and the trajectory that we're on and where we're at and the seriousness of the situation. So I'm glad she's here. She shares from a personal perspective. So that is so valuable. Someone who's been in and around things and knows things that she's willing to share with you. So I'm very glad to have you. Welcome, Winkie. I would like you to get us started with our conversation with just telling a little bit about yourself, help our audience to know who you are.
Well, thank you so much, Ginger, and I apologize for that little interruption there.
No problem.
My name is Winkie Ilic, and I'm a member of the homeschool community here in Western Pennsylvania for probably 17 years by now, okay? And homeschooling is something that I cherish. I think it's one of the greatest privileges that any family can possibly have. I'm a freedom lover. That's why I'm here right now. I'm here right now because I've experienced the freedom of homeschooling. I've experienced the freedom of this country. And I understand that one signature and it's gone. Yes. One signature and it's gone. And a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Chicago, and I am the daughter of a refugee. So my dad was a refugee originally from Ukraine. I grew up sort of in that bicultural way. My husband and I met almost 40 years ago at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, which he attended, but he was still a citizen of Yugoslavia, which was a communist country.
Yes.
He's Serbian, that's why my last name is Ilic. And so we eventually ended up in graduate school at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, where I also worked. I got my master's degree. I quit my PhD program for reasons I will share later here. But before that, I actually did live as a graduate student in Germany, in southwestern Germany for a while. And I was at the Berlin Wall 4 days before it came down in November 1989. And I
remember that.
Yes, and I have experiences right there at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at the Brandenburg Gate.
Wow.
Something in the air. People knew things were about to collapse.
Yeah.
Looking at the cemetery of the people who tried to escape and didn't make it, and there's a reminder of their choices and what it led to there. I've also traveled extensively and worked in Eastern Europe. I've lived in Serbia. I've lived in Belgium. I set up operations for a non-government organization in Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia, and Bosnia back in 2002, which was not long after the United States had, participated in the bombing of Serbia and other parts of Yugoslavia. So it was a very sticky diplomatic type of assignment. And after all of that, I became a homeschool mom. So, and that was what I always wanted, and by the grace of God, that was what I was granted. But in
So
that,
was that assignment as hard as your other assignments, or what do you think? How does
oh,
that compare?
we all know what's the hardest assignment by far, but the most beautiful assignment, the most beautiful assignment by far, you know. So that's my background. I studied German and Russian. I also studied music, and I actually have returned to music. I'm actually currently also a piano teacher. I teach in the homeschool community here. I've been teaching for probably at least 13, 14 years in the homeschool community. And one of the classes I'm currently teaching, and I've been teaching every other year, is US history through the presidents. And I have a very strong conviction that we need to develop analytical skills and not just
Yes.
parrot
Yes.
talking points.
Mm-hmm.
And coming from the bowels of the progressive university world, I understand the ideology that's coming at people. I understand how it manifests, and I understand what it takes to have the discernment to cope with it. And so I teach in this particular class, and then I alternate it with world history, geography, and culture. So every other year I switch it out. I have 22 students in that class this year. And they know that we're not discussing contemporary politics in the class. I don't need to, because we're just on our sixth president right now, and everything they need to know for this election, they've already figured out by how we do our analysis. And it's obvious. It's like, it's so obvious that I don't even have to say anything. I don't even, it's just because everything becomes self-evident. So that's some of those strategies are what I'd like to share today with you.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And like you said, the critical thinking is just like, where has it gone, right? Like, where has all the critical thinking gone? Like, it doesn't exist. It's like, tell me what to do. I see it everywhere. I see it in sports. You know, I see it, you know, when you're working with volunteers and in different, not necessarily so much in the homeschool community, but definitely when you get out there and you're mixing with other communities, it's just like, tell me what to do, or how do I do this, or I don't know what to do next. Like, there's no, you know, and it just applies in all of life, right? It's not just this topic we're thinking about, but just I guess maybe we would call it common sense, you know, maybe common sense. I don't know.
I call it passivity. We're on the receiving end all the time. And there's so much coming at us, we don't know how to respond. And so learning how to respond to this excess of information that's constantly coming at us, subtle and not so subtle. And so there's a lot of, I call it a filter. The students have to develop a filter so that when they're hearing something, they run it through a filter. They don't take it at face value. And so that's what I spend a whole year doing with them. And then they come back for more the next year.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So like, let's jump into that a little bit. Like, you know, tell me about your class. Like you told me a little bit about your class, and I'm thinking I want to go to Winkie's class. So like,
Fun. It's really fun.
yeah. So let's talk about that. Go ahead and share, you know.
Well, first of all, it's very non-traditional. And
Yes.
I put on the board every time they come to class, there's going to be 1 hour of thinking. You will be thinking this whole time, which means not pondering a fact that you already know, but making connections between those facts. And I have some basic principles that I have to lay out in the first place. And the number one, primary one, is that we have to operate with one very serious assumption, and that is all these issues related to US history, politics, everything that's going on is extremely complex. We cannot digest that level of complexity. And I think that that's the starting point that turns people off, because they feel overwhelmed by the complexity. They're afraid to make a mistake. They're afraid to participate and be a person who triggers some sort of who knows what result. Or they're going to be able to be pointed out, you were wrong, you were wrong. These people are corrupt because there's so much information, and oh, this guy turns out to be really bad when we all thought he was good. And there's just this endless exposure of oh, is not what I thought it was, right? And not to mention the fact that even that part aside, just grasping how it works, just in a very generic nuts and bolts way, is extremely complex.
Yeah.
So what happens, it's like when your house is a huge mess, you say, I don't know where to start. And you cry, and then you go look at the fly lady. And what does she say? She says, 15 minutes of cleaning blesses your family, right? And so what do? I clean for 15 minutes and I feel really great. I actually got that done. There's a corner on my dining room table. But the truth of the matter is we have to do that with this as well. We have to start plotting. We have to be patient with not knowing. We have to be patient with not mastering, but we still have to persist. We have to pursue, because there is enough there for us to proceed to starting to make some assessments. We have to make assessments because we are called to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. You can't be wise as a serpent and check out of everything. That's not part of it. So that complexity is the underlying principle that has to be addressed. Then comes context. So when we look at each individual president, so this is how this class begins. We don't just look at the president, we say, what was his context? Because every president is a product and a reaction to. There's not a generic formula. The first president had to invent the idea of a president because they were inventing a government and they were reacting to something that had been around for time immemorial, and they were terrified. That's the other thing people have to realize, that people have always been afraid that this is going to be the vote that's going to destroy this wonderful experiment, that I'm going to be the one that ruined it because it is fragile and it's extremely contentious by definition. So if you study American history, you see nothing but contention, you see nothing but fragility, and by the way, you see nothing but sinners. Sinners. Some of them really big sinners. Some of them maybe bigger sinners than we know, because we don't know. We don't necessarily know what they look like, even though we look at these paintings. We don't know how they carried themselves, although Washington was famous for his mannerly way.
Oh, you know what? We're reading his book of civility, his rules for civility, and some of them
hilarious,
are like,
isn't it?
wow,
Don't
that's
wipe the bug.
intense.
Don't flick the bug off the guy's chest in front of you. Things like that. Don't put your
and
feet up by the fire where the meat is.
My daughter is like, oh my word, what did he do? Just
when
sit
he
like
wrote
this?
that.
We
could use some of those still. We could use some of these
absolutely.
It's entertaining, but it's very revealing about who he is.
Yes, absolutely.
Now I get to the heart of the matter, and that is when we look. So in my class, the students have to pick these dimensions, and I'm kind of guiding them into what dimensions we're going to look at. So we have a point of analysis between each president, and there are 15 that we have. 15. And for each president, they have to make sure they know what those data points are, or some of it's analysis, like legacy, things like that. And they make charts, and then they compare as we go along. Oh, well, he was homeschooled, or he was university educated, or he was not educated, or he was a farmer, or he was a surveyor. This is a very major profession of many of the presidents, even up to Lincoln. And that's a very important topic I'm going to get to in just a bit. So we look at these very important dimensions that give us a point of discussion. Otherwise, what are you looking at? Like, it's just too big. It's just like this mass of something. You have to look at it in its dimensions, just like you're going to compare two cars, you're going to look at features. So the next step is to understand, what does the president do? How many people bother to even think about the actual position as opposed to ideological rhetoric? And when we look at it, we realize, wow, there are a lot of very serious responsibilities from the beginning. But now we said, can you imagine the degree of implications for ignorance in this day and age? Ignorance, let alone ill will, just the innocence of ignorance. I'm going to get back to that in just a minute. So you have that. And then you think about, how does someone become qualified? How does someone become qualified? We talk about that. How does someone become qualified? Well, one of the realities of context which is a big thread in my class as well, is this issue of technology and inventions. Because presidents, barring, Jefferson and a few others, are not inventors, but they are very much dealing with the changes that are happening due to the advancement of technology. This technology is the real driver of change. Technology is the driver of the realities, way more than the actual policies. Because when the students have to look up what are the inventions during this administration, and then you see, oh, well, this was invented at this point, but by 20, 30 years later, the country's running on trains, and the trains started in England to get the coal out of the mines, but now this changes communications because messages can be passed through trains. So you start to see that access to resources, flow of information, trade, all those things are driven by technological advances. And the president has to react.
Yeah. Well, and the challenge there too, though, with you don't know the capabilities of these things or the effects of these things. I just think of all the social media these days and the effects it's having on everyone's brain and how they function and all, and even attention span, the way things come so fast and quick and everything. Like you were saying it earlier about persisting through this mass of information. I don't think a lot of us have the ability to stick-to-itiveness, right? To stick to it anymore because it's so.
Totally agree.
And so they have these massive decisions to make, whether it's war related or at home technology related or whatever, whether to allow it or use it or whatever, but they have no idea how it's going to affect our health, how it's going to affect our well-being, how it's going to affect the functionality of the country.
It's profound.
Yes.
It's profound. It's shockingly profound, and it's terrifying on one level.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I are enjoying it right now, but it's profoundly terrifying, actually. Yeah. And as you say that, imagine the degree of complexity that a modern president has to be able to address, whether we are aware of that or not. So one of the questions I ask my students in class is, how many of you work? And how many of you can describe a bad manager? And pretty much everybody can. And I said, bad managers are a good thing because they teach you how not to do things. And I'm one of those people who started working very young, and I had a lot of jobs. And by the time I was in a position of management, I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. But I asked my students, tell me what happens when there's a poor management. And you know what the very astute answer I got from a young lady was?
What's that?
Don't know how to put the right people in the right position, and it turns into chaos.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's astute.
That's astute. And you can learn that by working in a food, restaurant context. Imagine that on a large scale. So this is the other aspect of the presidency. Who is around you? How do you motivate those people to get the job done? How do you stay in communication to get the job done? Our current president just had his first cabinet meeting in, I think, 11 months.
A long time. Yeah. Yeah.
And his wife conducted the meeting. Okay. So these are basic facts of our current reality. We cannot ignore those facts. And the other basic fact is what my students said. On the littlest micro level of a little, restaurant operation where a young lady is working her probably first or second job, she can see the business is going to succeed or fail on the abilities of that manager who may or may not have any experience.
Yeah.
So that leads me to the question of how do you get experience? So they look at the profession of these presidents, and of course we see generals and we see lawyers, and we see a lot of that. I say, well, what makes a general a good president? And we have to talk about the fact that they are used to directing people. They're used to mobilizing. They're used to assessing resources and deciding these resources can be allocated this way, and that way, right? At the beginning of the country, when we were just determining our laws and our operating system, so to speak, having lawyers was a really important thing, because what does the government do? It makes laws and executes laws, right? So lawyers are a logical, person. But are lawyers a logical person in 2024? That's my question. Do they have the management experience? Do they understand managing massive amounts of money? Do they
Yeah.
understand operations and keeping people in the right position so that operations yield results? Are they able to see their part as part of the whole, or are they just used to operating in a very narrow range? So I'm going to talk about some of the things that a president needs to understand.
Okay.
We all want him to be able to protect the laws of the country. That's a given. Everyone says, I swear to uphold the Constitution. But let's go a little bit more pragmatic than that. If you're going to help the country to sustain itself, let alone progress, you need to understand economic development. Now, this is one of the things that the founding fathers had, because they were all property owners. And they also understood that their property assessments were what were causing this problem between them and England, because they were determining the cost and the value of their products and how much they could buy with it and so on and so forth. This was a great source of consternation. They weren't doing that just as lawyers. They were doing that as people who understood the flow of goods and services and money and taxes and everything else. In modern day doesn't necessarily make you on the same as a lawyer in 1790 or 1800. Secondly, what is economic development? Economic development that's another thing that I used to be involved with, because when I was at the University of Tennessee, my students were all studying foreign languages and international business. So I was trying to get them internships. So I was in the business community, and I was, believe it or not, a member of the East Tennessee International Commerce Council, which was an economic development group. I used to attend all the events in East Tennessee. And so this means I'm with all the Japanese automotive companies. I'm with all these other agencies who are trying to bring business to East Tennessee, which, by the way, they've done very successfully. And we're talking 35 years ago. Why? Because you've got good roads, you've got interstates that interconnect so their products and goods can get on the interstates. With economic development, you need to understand electrical value, electrical distribution, and pricing. My sister was president of the Building Owners and Managers Association in suburban Chicago. She manages property. People who pay huge electricity bills care about things even more than we who have just our houses to cover. There's whole lobbies of people going to Washington to try to advocate for different types of electrical services and so forth. You have to understand water. You have to understand roads, because you have to understand zoning. You have to understand permits, and you have to understand the political context that's all in. That's what an economic development person knows. I actually have other experience in that, which I won't bore you with, but just to give you the whole context, which is what this is about. Does a person who knows that versus a person who doesn't know that, you weigh that out.
Yeah.
There's a person who knows how to do that both in the United States and internationally. I mean, when we start doing this internationally, now you're talking on a scale that is something that other people can only aspire to achieve. You have legal expertise and you have practical expertise for how things operate in reality and how they operate in terms of, now we have to talk about national safety. How do you become skilled at diplomacy? Many of our founding fathers spent years as diplomats before they became president.
Yes.
You get diplomatic experience in this day and age if you're not an official diplomat. And it's just a diplomat. I was involved with diplomacy. I worked with the Department of State because we were primarily funded through the Department of State, this American Councils for International Education. So I spent time in the State Department. I used to work with all the public affairs officers in different countries. How do you get that experience? You get that experience by doing things. You can't read about it.
Yeah.
You have to know who these people are.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to be a person who has something to say in the best interests of the United States, you do need to have some diplomatic experience, whether it's a business diplomacy or political diplomacy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Fundamental.
Yeah. Yeah. So if, I mean, any of those pieces missing, you have an incomplete picture. And then if you can't do it, you need to rely on someone close to you who does, and who's choosing that person. Are you choosing that person? Is that person elected? You know, if it's cabinet, obviously it's not elected.
That's right.
So who's your person going to choose to be in the cabinet to do those things and
It's
uphold that?
messy business.
It
It's very
is.
messy.
Yeah.
Overwhelming.
Yeah.
And it's stressful to even think about. And then you realize who would want to be president.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, honestly, that's what almost all my kids say. Oh man, I used to think anybody could be president, and now I think who would want to be president?
Yeah, there's a lot.
Honest person would be on their knees begging God for mercy to get them to do the job.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Another dimension of the presidency is fiscal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So again, because military affords the opportunity to have to be aware of material and how you move it and all this pricing and all this kind of stuff. That's a big part of the military, obviously. But it is not necessarily a part of a legal profession. So a person who is trained in legal dimensions of our system may not have much experience with extremely complex processes that happen in our financial system that I'm not even going to begin to even say I know one iota about. But I don't think I want somebody in there who knows maybe an iota more than me.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we talk about complexity, now we're understanding what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about something that is very serious.
Yes. Yeah.
And
It's not well, and if there's someone there who is obviously not skilled, then who's doing it? Somebody's doing it. Or it's getting dropped, or it's getting dropped, which is a problem too. But both of them is an issue because you don't know who's doing what, or it's being left by the wayside to rot or whatever. And then what's going to happen if this isn't taken care of? So
that's why many people homeschool. Is this why there are illiteracy rates throughout our major cities in this country when children are going to school and they end up illiterate? Has something been dropped? Has something been miscalculated? I follow the public education discussion just because I'm intrigued by what people say. And I don't condemn people who I mean, people can do whatever they want. That's what I like. I like freedom. Public schooling, private schooling, hybrid schooling, homeschooling. The point of the story is I want a choice. I want to choose. Maybe 1 year public schooling is perfect for me, and the next year, no, we're not doing it, or vice versa. There is this beauty of freedom. But when a government fears that freedom, then they have a tendency to cut it off, which is most of the world. Yeah. So I tell my students, understand, don't assume that your counterparts in Germany or other places around the world are doing this. No. And I can stand up here and I can say anything I want to you. I can say it because I'm free. And in my class, you can say anything back. I'm so radical, I don't grade them. And that's one of the reasons I don't grade them, is I want them to be completely free in my class. And I tell them, you have to look at yourself if you decided not to do the work, which is what freedom is all about. You have to look at yourself and say, I had it and I chose no. So you show up to class, you didn't do the work, you live with that outcome. And believe it or not, they do the work. Yeah. They do the work. Because, and I tell them, what if I came in today and I said, it's over, I'm grading you from now on. Ooh. I mean, the panic sets in, right? It's like, what? I said, no quizzes, nothing. And all of a sudden listen to what I'm talking about with them. I'm talking with homeschool students about every single thing I've discussed with you. Some of them are quite young and they can
Mhm.
handle it.
Mhm. Well, that's another thing. They can handle it. Where the expectation is so low anymore of, oh, they can't do this, or adulting is so hard. Like we have adults saying adulting is hard. It's just life.
It's
This is
just
the next
life.
step. You're growing up and it's time to it's just the
And
thing.
when they can do their own research, which is how I conduct the class,
Mhm.
I teach them how to be better researchers, but this is your information. You wrestle with it.
Mhm.
So this is what we live, this is what we have as Americans. And like we started the conversation with this passivity, if you want somebody else to make decisions for you, you'll get their decisions.
Mhm. Mhm.
You
Yeah.
will live with their decisions.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you like certain aspects of being free, you do have to fight for them.
Mhm. Mhm.
You do have to
Absolutely.
pay a price for them. Somebody else did. Other people did.
Yeah.
We still do too. And I'll be
Mhm.
honest with you, everyone who knows me knows that I'm the last, I have no social media accounts. I am very low profile. I don't like to go in public and speak my mind. I'm always in the back of the room, zipped up. This is completely out of my character to come on and Zoom something that's going to go into cyberspace for people to see. But I will tell you something. I could not be quiet one day more.
Mm.
And the day you reached out to me was the day after my heart had been pricked, like, you need to say something.
Wow.
And then
Wow.
next day your message came. I was like, whoa, now that's
Oh.
really fast. That kind of scared me a little bit. But it also made me
God
realize, you
doesn't
know what?
waste any time here.
I don't have,
God
that's
doesn't
right.
waste any time, Winkie.
I didn't have to hesitate. I didn't have to hesitate because it was like, no, I was prepped. I was
Yeah.
ready.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. I was thinking, I'm thinking through, all the things that you're saying, and it brought to mind a story when we first got into homeschooling. My husband worked with a man who worked in the computer department with him at the IT department at the local college. He was homeschooled, so we interviewed him. Well, what's this homeschooling stuff about? And he said, "Oh yeah, my mom doesn't grade me. She lets me grade myself because she said if you give yourself something you don't deserve, you're only going to give yourself grief. It's only going to come back on you." Right? So he had the freedom to do whatever he wanted there, but the decision he made was all on him. So he was, "Oh yeah, I'm straight A. It's all great, And then he goes somewhere and people expect something of him because of that, and he can't deliver. That's on him, right? So that where in some cases it's like, oh my goodness, that mom, holy cow. But it really taught him to take personal responsibility and examine himself,
Hmm?
right? And be honest and fair about himself, and like I said, to take that responsibility for what he was going to do. That's an invaluable lesson. I mean,
It is.
you
And
know,
and if I may add one more dimension to this, um, where do people get those standards? So, the kids are bombarded with pop culture, and I do mention the name of a particular singer who is very famous right now in class because all she has to do is tweet something and the whole world is, oh, what did she say? Right. And A, when you're old enough to be that person's mother, and B, when you know you've studied this, you kind of have a different perspective than somebody who's 15 or even
mm,
25 or even 35.
mhm,
And so one of the things that I've asked my students repeatedly is in the case of this particular singer and any other celebrity, I say, do you honestly think she knows more than you do on this subject? Do you honestly think she knows more than I do? Why would I listen to her?
yeah,
Why
yeah,
would I spend even half a second listening to someone who dances and sings for a living?
yeah,
I'm not asking someone to listen to me on subjects that I haven't spent time on. And I say, by the way, all of this as no expert on presidents. I'm not an expert on anything, but I have experience in the world,
mm,
seeing the impact of what it means to not have freedom. I have stood behind the Berlin
mhm,
Wall in East Berlin.
mhm. Wow.
I've seen empty shelves. I've seen the reality. of being cut off from your relatives.
Mhm.
People think that's not real. It's 100% real.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
still happening. It's still real.
Mhm.
And because we live in this isolated, distorted perception, any media source can tell us anything. And it's like, whoa. So that's one more topic, if you'll allow me, that I address in
Yeah.
the class. Say, okay, what do you use to research? Most of you go to Google. What is Google? I've been to Google.
Yeah.
I've been to Mountain View. I've walked around Google. Okay. I've eaten at their restaurants there. I know people who worked there for a very long time. I had a nephew who worked for that whole operation. And what I can tell you is it's a company. So we have to understand that companies, public or private, are not like just God's creation out there. They are individuals who
Mhm.
have a perspective.
Yes.
So even when you're using Google, understand you're always being given a perspective. So
Mhm.
where's your rudder? Where is your litmus test? Of course, we start with our faith. That's the founding point.
Mhm.
Once we move from there, the tools that I give my students, these analytical tools, to be able to compare, to be able to draw conclusions based on basic facts. What does this job require? What characteristics are needed? What qualifications does this person have? What is he going to face? How did he face it? Those are things that you can develop and you can cultivate and you can get good at. And
Mhm.
that you can navigate this and you can do it successfully. But I will throw out and say that not participating in your mind is a delusion, because whether you're participating or not, we are on a trajectory. And
Yeah.
that trajectory is driven by technology. It is driven by
Yes.
pop culture. It is driven by influences that we know nothing about. I will get back to the university story in another moment. And as Americans, we participate in that actively or passively.
Mhm.
It's still participation. There is no such thing as no participating. A person
Mhm.
who sits out of an election is still participating.
Yep. Yep.
So are you going to be that little drop that moved the trajectory so that little children are not welcomed at the border by
Mm.
criminals?
Mm.
Or are you going to say, well, I'm out of this. I'm out of this. Okay. But understand that we do have some little say in the movement. How can we can see it clearly as homeschool families? We are
Mhm.
so against the grain. People look at
Mhm.
us in the store like, why aren't you in school? It's like,
Cool.
life is school. We're in school, right? We used to make jokes, homeschool math. We're calculating our bill. It's like all these hilarious things. But the truth of it is, freedom terrifies people.
Yes. Yes, I was going to mention that earlier. I mean, our natural bent as people is to get to a safe place where we're being taken care of. It's not freedom. We're not naturally freedom minded. So we kind of, like you said, as homeschoolers, we're used to going against the grain. We're used to fighting against the current with everything. Freedom's the same thing. It's not this oh, I'll just sit back and enjoy it.
Oh
No,
no,
you got to keep fighting for it. People fought for it before. We got to keep fighting for it now.
100%, because someone will be more than happy to fill in that gap.
Absolutely.
And they will fill in that gap. And they
Yes.
are filling in that gap.
Yes.
It's not will potentially, it's happening.
Yes.
And they do it here. It
Mm-hmm.
starts here. And it
Mm-hmm.
starts with children, and it starts with media, and it starts with messages. And if they're not aware of the source of those messages, they don't know how to process them.
Yeah.
Young people and adults as well. And so I'm very privileged in my mind that I went through the tortures of to experience the actual reality of what's been happening in this country for 40, 50 years in the academic world, which is where a lot of the cultural thrust is coming from.
Yes.
Because that's the source that produces all the people who work in
Mm-hmm.
all the different spheres of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so talking about culture is probably the other aspect of why we need to vote, because our culture is dependent on what's happening in our government.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't, you know, how many of us really love our modern culture? Probably very few.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's a little drop that we've said, oh, collectively as a group, we can kind of turn this in this direction as opposed to this direction.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in trajectory because there's not one thing that's not happening on a trajectory. As long as there's
Mm-hmm.
motion behind that object, it's on a trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
So we do get to pick that, whether we're participating or not in our minds as voters. And I encourage anyone who's listening here to really, if you have a problem with voting, you know, this election, to maybe consider some of the things you and I have been talking about here and realize, you know, you do have a place, you can make a difference. You may not feel like that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be in love with anybody. You don't have to think anybody is particularly your favorite person, but it's about the trajectory.
Yeah. 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 So yeah, I agree. And I think we all need to recognize the importance of, like you said, it's that one drop. But that drop, you add the drops and it's going to change the way the river's flowing, right? So everybody out there, I mean, it's so important. Tell everyone you know, you've got to get up, you've got to be involved, you've got to be looking at, you know, what, go back and listen to this again, what Winkie was saying, all those little bits, all those things that are important for the leader of this great country needs to have all of these different skills and be able to do all these different things. And if they can't do the things themselves, they have to be able to find the right person to do it and be able to, like, people managing and stuff like that. There's so many different parts, and take the time. Take the time to process all this. Take the time to think. We don't take time to think. I don't think we take time to think. We're so busy getting hit by this and hit by that and watching this and watching that and doing this
Absolutely.
activity and doing that activity. And we're
Yes.
so busy. Unplug, think, pray,
Pray. Oh, pray. Pray
and
most of all.
yes, get up there and get out there. And, you know, I've been seeing these things, and I guess it's just the hip way to get people involved, but like the Kamala signs that say, let's have the voting party. The voting party. So have a party, get together, you know, get together with people and talk about it, discuss things, you know, whatever, but be active in what is going on. Because you do have influence. You do have influence, and there is a way to, like you said, with trajectory. Wow, it's a hard word, to change the way things are going. Winkie, I'm so glad that you shared this with us. That class would knock my socks off. But I think we're gonna wrap up for today because there was so much. And guys, listen to this again, share this with everybody, have your kids listen to it so they can understand things. Just, you know, take it to the table and talk over it, right? Listen to it together. And come back together with us next time where we're going to continue talking about trajectory and some of the things that Winkie has experienced in her past and what she's seeing happening in this country that we cannot deny and we need to be aware of. So anyway, Winkie, thank you so much for joining me today. And
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
oh, I am so glad that you chose to come on. And I just love the way God works. I should really not keep silent. Bling, bling, hey, Winkie.
Literally.
That is so awesome. I love to see how God works. So,
yes.
Okay, everybody. Hey, remember, as this season wraps up, it's October 22nd. The election is November 5th. It's coming up really, really soon. Think about these things, act on it, okay? As you're training your children to follow Christ in all of life. This is part of being that responsible duty as a citizen. This is part of the work that God has given you to do. Model it for your kids, talk about it with your kids, and you can start them young, like we were talking earlier. Kids understand things earlier than you realize they do. So go ahead and get in that great conversation today. And we look forward to seeing you back here in 2 weeks to wrap up our conversation. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.